clients. So I hope you're as excited about this topic as I am. My name is Jeffrey Kelch. I'm based in the USA, but I've lived in Asia and worked in Asia for over 30 years, specifically China and Japan. And I've dedicated my career to doing market research in the Asian region. And I have with me Baldwin Cha. Baldwin is a lead researcher at Holden. He is from Singapore, but is based in Shanghai. Baldwin has over 5 years experience at Holden and over 20 years of experience of research in the APAC region and around the world. So Baldwin will be leading our discussion today. So welcome, Baldwin.
Hi, Jeff.
As far as an agenda goes, I'd like to take a bit of time to share some news about Holden, and then we'll just jump right into the meat of the presentation. And before we do that, just as a housekeeping item, if at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, please don't hesitate to do so. We do have a chat box. All you need to do is just punch in your question, and somebody from my team will make sure it's addressed. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. You can also choose to ask a question at the end of the webinar. We'll have a special question and answer section then as well. So first off, I'd like to give you a brief update on Holden and what we're doing in Japan. I think most people on this call know that we've been covering Japan for many, many years. But what has happened recently is there's just been such an excitement and such an interest in Japan and such a demand that we decided to set up an office in Japan with our own feet on the ground and our own resources. And we did this about 1.5 years ago. Things are going really, really well under the leadership of Mr. Ono, who's the managing director of our Japan office. We have 5 members and quite busy and very exciting for us. But what I wanted to share with you today is some development on our quantitative capabilities in Japan through our own buildup, as well as some partnerships that we have in Japan. We now have one of the best resources for HCPs in Japan. And also we can offer you this at a very reasonable cost. So next time you have a quant project in Japan, you need to reach out to HCPs, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll get back with you with our feasibility and costs just as soon as we can. Very exciting news for us. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Baldwin. He'll take you through the topic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Over to you, Baldwin.
Thank you, Jeff. So I think as usual, we have quite a lot to cover. So if you have any questions, you can just type it in the box and we'll get it answered. Just to start everyone off, we just start with some key points and also maybe why we started and we chose this topic. I mean, recently there's been a lot of RFQs, a lot of queries, a lot of just asking a lot of questions concerning this topic. Also some new blockbuster drugs they're coming in from the US and coming into China, and people have been asking us about these as well. So we decided to do a topic on obesity in China. Also because there's been quite a stark increase in obesity rates in China as well. So as you can see, some 4 very main points that we have a very big, large patient base of diabetic patients worldwide, just because China is the biggest in terms of population in the world. So yeah, by this sheer size, it's going to reach about 170 million diabetic patients by 2045. Of course, that's also due to the increasing prevalence. So it's risen from 1% to about 12% today, which is quite a big increase. We have a lot of corporate competition as well, and in addition to that, some local domestic competition as well, which is quite interesting, which we will show you with our quant study that we did by ourselves for this topic, which we'll go into later. Yep. So just dive into it right now. So I think the first part will just go into a little bit of the disease landscape, and the second part will show you the quantitative bits. So looking at the disease in China, we first look at obesity rates, because obesity rates are actually positively correlated to the type 2 diabetes in China. I think for those who do not know China too well, but I'm sure most of you do, China is huge. China is about the size. I've said this, I might have said this in previous presentations, but China is like the size of Europe, roughly the size of Europe. and that's just one country, and Europe is made of many countries. But one thing to note is that China is still a developing country with some very highly developed cities. So in terms of the culture, the quality of life, the habits that spill over, the Western influences and everything. So there's a lot of factors that go into why obesity and diabetes have increased in China. Yeah, but so we will explain that in more points. But the interesting thing that we've thought to do is to put China against the US, Singapore, Japan, and Japan. Sorry, this is because it gives us a better comparison. Like for example, US is a lot of people, a lot of you guys are from the Western side, so we're using US as example, and also because it's very highly developed with also high obesity rates. We chose Singapore because it's also very highly developed, extremely, it's like way developed, right? So, but way lower obesity rates. Japan also very highly developed, but even lower obesity rates. And we want to go into like why this, why is this the case? And I think can shed light upon the rates and like the drivers, and maybe even a little bit into the diagnostic and treatment journeys as well. And the question I think for today is, will China follow the US example or Singapore's example? Or is it going to be having its own different journey in terms of the obesity and diabetes market, or the patient future, Okay, so some reasons into why China is gaining. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's a bit of some Western influence. There's a lot of fast food going on into China, especially for the first tier cities. As the city develops, there's been the pace of living has increased, and therefore the demand for fast foods has also increased. There's more accessibility, there's urbanization, there's motorization, you're getting less hassle, there's much less hassle in terms of getting to your food, and also cheaper food and availability of these foods as well. So a lot of these, for those that have been into in China, the rise of these ease of access and delivery platforms, you get cheaper food with no tips needed. These foods are even cheaper than when you eat at the restaurant. It can be at least 20 to 30% cheaper, and yeah, and they don't even charge you a delivery charges. So all these access to foods has been gaining and urbanizing, and all these have been contributing to obesity and T2D in China. So of course, this is a generalization. There's also some regional food culture factors that go into this. Specifically the northern regions where it's colder, where the staples are like wheat and flour types of food, yeah, and they have oily dishes, and the portions of food are actually bigger than than what you get in the southern regions of China. So comparing that to like the other markets like Singapore, China still lacks some of the more stringent health labels that try to educate the public about what is healthy and what is not. Like Singapore has this Nutri-Grade thing, yeah. But China has realized this, and they have been scaling up, has been trying to introduce campaigns, especially starting in 2024 to 2026, the year of weight management. These kind of titles are school actions on salt, oil, and sugar and stuff like that. So if you compare it to like the US, which has like a larger portions, and China and the Asian countries trying to learn from the Western to prevent even the market or the people from becoming having a toll on their healthcare system, as well as the aging population in China. So there's actually a huge toll on that as well, especially with the aging population in China. The government wants to reduce the toll of healthcare of these issues in the population. Yeah. So just to have some historical data looking at the compound annual growth rates, we can see that China's growth rate is actually trailing not far behind from the US. Looking at Singapore and Japan, Singapore is definitely lower than China. Singaporeans, like myself, I've lived in Singapore for like 20 years. And the food, the culture, we tend to be more health conscious. And if you've been to Japan, it's a tier higher. They are actually very conscious of their portions. Their food is there's almost no oil in it and stuff like that. Maybe Jeff can tell you more later. So this is just some very surface level information. So if you want to know more, you can just let us know. We'll answer your questions after. So some basic landscape stuff on diabetes, T2D, specifically in China. So 5 quick points: prevalence, age, risk, geographical factors, and diagnosis and historical trends. Prevalence is about 12.4%. Pre-diabetic population is about 35%. And we mentioned earlier, 140 million patients, the highest number globally. So there's a huge market for it. So I think some of you, our clients, have already been asking us questions like, oh, what is, how big is the market? How can you enter? What are the entry points? When will which drugs be making more entries, and how will the market share shift here and there? So yeah, we will talk about that in a bit, in the second part. Age risk, like the rest of the world, China also follows some of the risks. So meaning older people, especially those after 40. And but the interesting is that there's been increasing trends in adults, in earlier younger adults. Race also plays a part. So I think for China, and maybe as well for Asians, diabetes affect them at a lower BMI. So that is something to it's interesting to know as well. When we look at geographical factors, I think we mentioned this earlier, some northern areas, but higher urban prevalence. But the thing is, we are seeing a lot of growth in the rural areas as well. So this is something that is interesting, because the rural areas, they have less diagnostics, but in China, we have more, we see more growth there, which is kind of very interesting. Yep. Eastern regions like Shanghai, like Shenzhen, they have high prevalence as well. Most probably due to more sedentary and high caloric lifestyles. Yeah, and one thing interesting about the patients in China is that about half of diabetes patients in China, they're undiagnosed. So there's a lot of factors for that. Just not being known, they're not educated. Diabetes is something that they should be taking tests for, or just basically they're just not that educated in having being more health conscious to know that what they have in their body. Yeah, so there's actually a need for early screening and awareness in China. So diagnostic tools, more education on that. Yeah. So we mentioned, prevalence has increased nearly 3 to 4 times in the past 30 years in China. So some estimates, go into like 170 million by 2045. And I mentioned earlier would have a rising burden on public health care systems, especially with the aging population. So one very interesting chart or world map, heat map, or whatever this thing is that the areas for China in this area, maybe I can show it with the pointer right here. So this is China here, right? So it's been enlarged, overrepresented as compared to the US, because this is the prevalence chart here. And if also actually, if we look at India, is also quite a big overrepresentation graphically. Yeah, but when we look at the expenditure, we can see that the West actually has much more expenditure when it comes to T2D. Yep. We look at Europe as well here. So we can see that that simply tells us, or maybe we can just make a guess to say that government spending and or treatment of T2D in Asian countries is not catching on yet, is underdeveloped. if you want to get onto the if pharmaceuticals want to get onto on right on this boat, they should do it sooner rather than later, because expenditures will increase, or maybe also because there are some government policies in place like VBP in China that actually suppresses these prices down. So there are a lot of factors, but it's actually very interesting to know that these different regions and different cultures actually have very different things that's going on within the market. It's actually very volatile, very obviously volatile, but a very different market that we can look at. Yeah. For this, on a landscape side, apart from the landscape side, we just want to very quickly go through, for those that not too in the know. Actually, it's actually very, very natural, well, not natural, but it's pretty much a lot of these diabetes and obesity factors. Actually, a lot of it are lifestyle related, and actually, we want to tell you more about this and how is it different in the Asian regions as compared to the Western regions. But we like to look at these 6 major risk factors, of which 4 of them are actually lifestyle related. I think for this point, I think Jeff, I think you have more information on this.
Yeah, my information is a little bit more towards culture. But thank you, Baldwin. I think there's no doubt that modernization in China has had a profound impact on the lifestyle of Chinese people. And similar to industrial nations, we know that Chinese people, especially those living in large cities, have become more sedentary. They've become more accustomed to high caloric food options. They have a multitude of unhealthy snacking fast food choices now, and these didn't even exist less than a generation ago. And the growth of business that cater to these less healthy eating habits has had a tremendous impact. And there's a tremendous amount of opposite options, and it's very ubiquitous in Chinese society. So there's no doubt that there are these outward, in fact, aspects of society that are impinging on the growth of diabetes and obesity in China. But what I want to do now is just kind of take a look at the aspect of culture and to what extent does that play a role in diabetes and obesity. Last week, I had the pleasure of listening to a very fascinating presentation given by Peter Simpson of Sarasota Ventures at the Intellis conference in New Brunswick. And Sarasota Ventures has very kindly given me permission to share some of their findings today. And the topic that Peter covered was the extent that culture affects the behavior and the expectations, and therefore the necessity to adjust communication and healthcare practices based on the differences of culture. And basically what was looked at was 6 factors that vary across cultures around the world, and they are authority, individualism, self-reliance, ambiguity, avoidance, long-term planning, and indulgence. And all these factors were base weighted with the rest of the world to see the relevant level importance in that culture. And so, by the way, if you wanted to see the whole, we're going to be focusing on China pretty much in this topic. But if you wanted to see the results for the entire world, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll happily put you in touch with Sarasota Ventures and Peter Simpson. But first off, looking at this, before we get into China, I kind of wanted to look at the Western world, and specifically we focused on the English-speaking world, that being the U.S., the U.K., Australia, Canada, etc. In these 6 factors that I just mentioned. And what we see right off the bat is the importance of individualism and self-reliance. They score very, very high in English-speaking countries, whereas authority is much low compared to the rest of the world. And this seems to make sense. This seems basically to show that in English-speaking countries, people tend to value their own independent decision-making. They will make decisions for themselves, and they feel that is the best way to get on with healthcare decisions. And on the right side, there's also some interesting aspects of long-term planning and indulgence. We see that in English-speaking part of the world, there's a lot less emphasis on long-term planning, and instead there's more emphasis on indulgence, which seems to indicate that in the English-speaking world, it's more about, I guess what I could say is enjoying life to the fullest in the here and the now, and less about preparing for a future, less about going through hardships to prepare for a future. And I think this has had an impact on instant gratification in this culture, especially when it comes to food choices. And of course, this has a direct effect on diabetes and obesity in these markets. By contrast, looking at China, we see that we see the exact same 6 factors were studied, but we see almost the entirely opposite results. Okay, so instead of individualism being important in China, we see authority is very important, and this is not surprising when you consider that China has been through a number of authoritarian regimes over the years. So it really isn't surprising. But more importantly, that it's the importance of family in the Chinese culture. China is a very family-centric culture, so oftentimes the family makes decisions for the individual, and this is also true in healthcare as well. It's not uncommon at all for a patient to be in a hospital room suffering from whatever condition he has, and the family's out in the hallway talking to the doctor, making decisions about his treatment. So this is quite common. It's a very normal, natural way to do things in China. So that is part of that authority, I think. And on the right side of this, I want to turn your attention again to long-term planning and indulgence. We see the opposite of the Western world, or at least the English-speaking part of the Western world. We see a much higher importance put on long-term planning and less on indulgence. Chinese culture just naturally emphasizes planning for the future. And what this means is oftentimes the perception is going through a little bit of hardship, going through a lot of hard work, with the idea that there's a bright future after that will come out of all this hard work. So there is a lot of focus on this, and I'm not surprised to see this there. And also the lower mark for indulgence. So again, this is part of that in Chinese culture. Rather than engaging in instant gratification, it's more important to put that off, forego that for now, and put the emphasis on the future. So these definitely have an impact on the type of food choices, the dietary choices that are made in the Chinese culture, and therefore will have an impact on diabetes and obesity. Now, of course, China's becoming more and more Western every single day. It's developing, and it will more than likely start moving more towards the direction of other Western developed countries, such as the United States and the UK. But at this point, culture still seems to reign a strong hold on China. I'd like to take a look at some other metrics related directly to food consumption with this as well. And this is just China that I'm showing here. We can see that sugar consumption, caloric intake, are much lower in China than the rest of the world. And this fits in with what we discussed with regard to the culture. And if we look at it compared across the board with English-speaking countries, we can see right off that caloric intake in China is much lower. Sugar consumption is much lower in China than the English-speaking world. And this kind of fits in what we've already talked about. Diabetes and obesity is also much lower as a result of this. And interestingly enough, we threw in Singapore and Japan as well. Singapore and Japan are also of an Asian culture with very, very strong roots of Confucianism, with some of the very strong sentiments about family. So I'm not surprised that we also see this in Singapore and Japan as well. But keep in mind that Singapore and Japan have been very developed for some time now, and they've adapted a lot of Western practices. Still, they have maintained to keep a lower caloric intake and less sugar. So that is just a proof of the importance that culture plays in these markets as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. That was very, very insightful. With that being said, I think earlier we mentioned that we want to look at some of the blockbuster drugs that a lot of our clients have been asking us about. So just a very quick overview on what these drugs are. I think these are categorized as GLP-1 drugs, or GLP-1 RA drugs, but just for short, GLP drugs. We're looking at 2 companies, mostly Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, coming up with 4 different drugs. each drug, mostly for one in each category for obesity and one for type 2 diabetes. So I think the first one that came to the market was Ozempic, and this I think shook out the market a little bit. I put some prices, some over there to just to give you a quick overview on what people are paying, what the average person is paying. Of course, this is not this is just a huge generalization. There's a lot of different categories of tiers of payments, but this is just to give you an overview. Why we have put it in this format is to see how these drugs has gone into the market to treat both diabetes and obesity, and which drugs came out when in each market. So just a couple of very interesting points. We can see that for the US, for looking at colors alone, we can see that the semaglutide, which is owned by Novo Nordisk, they are the first movers, and then they first moved with Ozempic and then with Wegovy. Tirzepatide from Eli Lilly came after, also a very popular drug. First targeting mostly with type 2 diabetes patients, and then looking at the obesity patients. So they're all following this trend. So they would first look at type 2 diabetes, and then they look at the obesity. So the only difference is that the dosage difference. I'll not talk too much about price, because that would be a topic that would take too much time, because there's a lot of different price factors. But for China, if you're looking at China, we have the VBP policy, which is the volume-based procurement policy. We do have a separate deck on it, and it would take a whole presentation to even go through what it is. I mean, there's the category A list, category B list, how to get in, what cycles these VBP policies entail, which companies, and the different strategies that these companies take in order to take advantage of these VBP policies, and the effect of these VBP policies on the pharmaceuticals, the market, as well as the patient. We have all that in a different deck, but we will not go through this today. So these are just an overview that these policies do affect the market share and usage, as well as the adoption into the hospitals, as well as what the doctors or the HCPs are recommending. Okay, so for today's overview, we just want to give you a very quick overview on what diabetes is, looking at the diagnosis and treatment. So in China, it's a good thing that they're using the global WHO ADA standards. So they're using 4 main types. The only difference is that of the four, one type, which is the HbA1c. It's only mostly available in bigger hospitals or in tier 1 cities, because it is still not it's still very expensive in the country. So they are using most of the 3 others, namely FPG, OGTT, and RPG. Okay, so the testing standards are aligned with the global testing standards as well. Okay, so another quick overview. This is a simplified diagnosis and treatment journey. Yeah, some of the cultural interesting points about China is that in China, especially for the tier 1 and tier 2 cities, annual checkups are actually paid for by the employer. So every year the company go like, hey, you guys, you need to go for an annual checkup. It's paid for me. I'll check you for everything, for diabetes, for high blood pressure, for cancer markers, everything. Yeah, so this is paid for by the company. So it's very, very common for that. Yep. So they have their annual physicals. Some of the common entry points on where their diabetes journey begins is from their annual health checkups, or incidental, they find out that something is wrong, or they have these things called the CHSCs, which is the community screenings, community health service centers. So these are service centers that set up in the in town, or they can be temporary centers, they can be a nearby health center. So these are some of the areas that the government has set up to promote healthy living. So these are some of the entry points. And of course, they'll perform the standard diagnostics, they'll perform the microvascular screening. Upon discovery that something is wrong, they'll go to they'll screen for this, and the patients will go directly to the department, so that there won't be there mostly won't be a GP involved. So if they find out there's something wrong, that they have they suspect they have diabetes, they just go straight to the endocrinology department or metabolism department. Yeah, and then if the hospital does not have the right diagnostic tools, for example, as I mentioned, the HB A1C is not available in some hospitals. They go directly to the class 3 hospitals if they need further tests. So upon diagnosis, yeah, there can be 3 outcomes: no complications, mild to moderate diabetes, or severe. So with each different scenario, they have different care routes. Okay, so there's from having no complications to educating them, to severe complications, to having them to manage to prevent disability and death. So I will not go too much into that. So once that has been managed, they would try to achieve stability. So once they achieve stability, they will have regular follow-ups. So when they are not stable, or when things have escalated, they will have to be referred to the specialty clinics again, and then they'll be given like the SGLT2 or GLP-1 drugs or insulin as needed, and then they'll have to go back to their stability regime as well, where they have the ongoing follow-up. Yeah, so I made some little notes here: tier 1 to 2 cities, tier 3 cities. So what are their reliance on tests and stuff like that? Okay. Moving on, we just want to dive into the quant study. So for the quant study, we did a very interesting thing. So we at Holden, we went through, we asked about 170 HCPs, and we got 370 real patient report forms. So we asked them very simple questions on how many patients they're treating, a little bit of the patient demographics and stuff, as well as the drugs that they were using. So this is from our primary data. We can see that aligning with the international patterns, the diabetes patients are primarily older. So about 80%, almost 80% of patients are 40 years and above. And most of them, actually a larger majority of them, are males as compared to females. Yeah, so it's just like aligned with the international patterns across the globe. Another thing, if you're not already known, is that there's a high preference for foreign drugs in type 2 diabetes, with 50 foreign drugs taking about 57% of the market share, as compared to 43%. I think it would be interesting if we were to track this over time. We would see that the domestic market would probably increase. But the domestic market is actually quite fragmented now. I will show you that a little later. Just to give you some examples of some foreign drugs that have been used more in China would be the Merck glucophage, the Novo Nordisk Novopan, or from Bayer the Archibald from Bayer. Yep. So what about, like, we mentioned about the blockbuster drugs. What about these GLP-1 or like, Ozempic? What is their role, and why aren't we not showing it right here? So in China, these drugs actually are quite new. They're actually very new. So in China, there's a lot of policies that you have to go through. There's a lot of regulations that they have go through. GLP drugs like Ozempic, semaglutide, they're growing, definitely growing, but they're very much held back by a lot of reimbursement policies, like the one I mentioned earlier, the VB policies, which actually affects directly on the hospital procurements, and also just very basically, they have these drugs have a late entry into the market, so they're still forming some clinical trials, they're taking some adoption, the uptake, and stuff like that. Yeah. So the other thing is that in China, the doctors also try to follow religiously the guidelines. Yeah, so they follow guidelines, for example, the Chinese Diabetes Society. So, but and most adults actually start with metformin, which I think is also the same case in the US, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing is that the price is one of the main factors, because diabetes is something that you have to manage throughout your life. So price is actually a very sensitive topic, or is one of the most prioritized considerations. And for that, insulin is actually very, very cheap in China as compared to like GLP-1 drugs. Yeah. So, but I think once the reimbursement policies come in, once the VBP has stabilized for the GLP-1 drugs, the uptake would definitely see some increments. Also, when they come to obesity, healthy living, and prevention of diabetes, that is an area, interesting area, to prevent diabetes with managing obesity. That would be a market that has not been addressed previously in China, and that would be a very interesting topic as well, because that would be maybe going into the realm of consumerism, consumer drugs as well, in China. I think in China we have also seen um, some trend of these GLP-1 drugs for obesity becoming less stringent, so you might be able to get them from doctors just by a visit, on the same day itself. So we've heard about that, but I think it would be nice to track that and see how it goes. Tracking it for the future. Yeah. So without further ado, let's look at the top 10 brands in China. So the first brand would be, of course, Merck, and followed by Novo Nordisk, and then AstraZeneca, Bayer, and then we have a couple, or more Chinese companies. But 7 of the 10 in this list are actually they're foreign manufacturers, so they still lead the market. And this is actually very interesting. Right after this slide, I'll tell you why. But the generic ones that lead the market, the names of the drugs that lead the market, they're metformin, insulin, arquebus, and the dapagliflozin. Yeah, so the rest are little bits here and there, less than 5%. But the top 4 are the main drugs that have been used for T2D in China. So as I mentioned earlier, why I'm saying it's interesting, because for metformin, Merck is is taking the monopoly in this. For this, there's no other company that's doing metformin in China. But if we look at the generics, the substitute in China, we have very fragmented, 14.3% against a 22%, which is owned by one company, Merck. But if you look at the Chinese market, there's a lot of companies that do the generics that provide metformin. And I'm not going to list all the companies here. I mean, I'm just going to list the top 3. And the top 3, they're only like about 1% each. So you can see how fragmented the market is. Yeah. And if you look at the second one, which is insulin, we have like Novo Nordisk and Sanofi. We can see that for China, for the Chinese brands, it's also the same case. It's about they maintain about 1 to 2%. And the interesting thing is that they're all different companies. If you see the companies here, like Huadong, and like over here, they have like Tonghua. They're all different Chinese companies, which is very interesting on how fragmented the market is. So from here we can actually see that there's a lot of preference for foreign drugs, and for these foreign drugs, they're only looking at 1 or 2 brands for each of these drugs. Yeah, for arquebus, it's just mostly Bayer, so it's all very singular. And this could be said the same for the Chinese brands as well, also equally as fragmented. Okay, so I think with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. Well, nicely, we have 40 minutes, so we have some time left. But before we go into the questions, Jeff, could you maybe tell us what's new in Holden?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Baldwin. Very interesting. I just want to kind of talk before we go. First of all, do we have any questions about the topic matter? Okay, if there are any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat box. We'll be happy to address them as best we can. And if you have any questions after the presentation, anytime in the next several weeks or so, please don't hesitate to reach out. You're more than welcome to contact me or somebody on the team or Baldwin directly. The recording for this webinar will be posted on our website, and you're more than welcome to download that for your own reference, or even share that with any of your colleagues who weren't able to attend today. So that will also be available to you as well. Before we go, I just kind of wanted to share some more news about Holden, and that is our e-quote. So I think if you've attended the webinar before, you've probably heard me talk about e-quote. So I apologize if this is a repeat for some people, but what eQuote basically is it's our platform for you to access feasibility and cost quotes for your project online and directly and immediately. So it's a very simple process. You just simply get onto our website, punch in the specifications of your project, that being the geography, the type of doctor you want to recruit, all the different details, click the button, and our feasibility and ballpark costs will come out immediately. So it's a very convenient, very easy to use, and I strongly recommend that if you have a need for understanding what is possible in the Asian market, and it's an urgent need, this is certainly an option you can consider. You no longer need to wait for somebody to respond to you. You no longer need to worry about time zone differences. The response is automatically through the system. So please don't hesitate to get online and try our eQuote sometime in the near future. Getting cost quotes for the Asian market has never been easier. That's about it. And if there aren't any questions, we'll bring this webinar to a close. I do want to say that we are planning another webinar in November. The date hasn't been decided yet, but I will be announcing this very soon. And this webinar will be related to the Japanese market specifically. So I think there's probably a lot of interest in the Japanese market. So please stay tuned. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar in November. And Baldwin, thank you very much for all your preparation. Thank you, everybody, for attending today.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks, everyone.